us live here in the Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner. As always, today I am super excited to have Holly Smale on the show with me. She's got a brand new book that's been out for a couple of weeks now. It's called, well, if you're in the US, it's called Cassandra in Reverse, and in the UK, it has a slightly different title, doesn't it?
It does. It's called the Cassandra Complex in the UK.
That has to be strange that not only for a lot of authors when you're writing the book you tend to have a bit of a title in mind, and then when your publisher gets a hold of it, it doesn't always stick that way. But then when you're dealing with different markets and you have different names, that has to be kind of bizarre, having this thing that you created and it's out in the world, but it's differently out in the world.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is a bit weird. I mean, the Cassandra Complex was the title that I had when I was working on it, and then I think America just felt like they wanted a slightly different feel for the title. So, I mean, they both work. The only problem is obviously trying to explain which one's which, and when people are looking for one but can't find it, it can be a
Yeah.
bit confusing.
Before we really get into talking about the book and stuff, I like to start with a fun question sometimes, and it kind of helps to set the tone. So, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller, Holly?
It's actually a super clear one. So I was 4 years old, and I was obsessed with books from birth. My mum is a retired English teacher, so she used to read me really inappropriate stuff: Shakespeare, Byron, Keats. As a toddler, and I became obsessed with the Faraway Tree series. So I'd learned to read by that point. So I was kind of carrying this book around with me, and it suddenly occurred to me that I had no idea where it came from. And I remember sitting in bed and asking my mum, how did this book get here? And she explained, that a woman had made it up and written it down and sent it to a publishing house, and then sold millions of copies. And I remember just getting this incredible thrill all over my body. And I sat upright in bed and I said, that's what I want to do. And yeah, I stuck to it for the rest of my life. There was never a question.
Wow. And how old were you roughly?
Four. Four. I was four. So yeah,
Yep.
it was
I'm sure that happens to all 4-year-olds at some point or another.
Yeah, I was incredibly precocious. So yeah, I made a pretty quick decision that I never went back on. I think I had a wobble a few times, and I thought it might not be possible. But apart from that, I was very clear-minded on what I wanted.
That is amazing. We've done more than 1,500 author interviews, and it's very rare that you encounter someone who's had a straight path, a narrow focus, because for a lot of writers it's more of a circuitous route. You kind of go through life and you collect this experience and collect that experience, and somewhere the writer's gene kicks in, and you interpret all that stuff and it comes out as fiction. But it's really a rare thing. I can count on two hands the people that have had that dedicated focus from, I knew I was going to be a writer, and everything that I did was in service to that dream. That
Yeah, I
we,
mean, it was immediate. I literally got up the next morning and I started writing, and
wow.
I started making my own books. So I started kind of making cardboard covers out of cereal boxes and sticking them together with sellotape. And yeah, I knew, and presenting them to my family with pictures on the front cover and title. Yeah, I was very committed from a very young age. So I don't remember a time really when it wasn't the thing I wanted most in the world.
What did your mother, what did your parents think of that declaration, that this is my life's work from now on?
It was very in character for me. I also decided when I was four that I was going to be vegetarian, and I stuck to it, and I'm still vegetarian. Uh,
Wow.
35 years later. So yeah, it's something that's part of my character, is this ability to hyper focus and not obsess is a cruel word, but it's something that I've been able to do, is just focus and just go for it, no matter how hard or how long it takes. It took me quite a long time.
Well, Cassandra in Reverse is I love this book so much, and it when I first read about the book, um, in my mind I kind of said, okay, well, I know what this book is, so I'm going to go into it with a sort of preconceived, like we always do. You take that copy on the back cover and you think, oh, okay, I know where this is going. No, I didn't. It is completely different. And we'll talk all about that in a minute. But before this book, you had a wildly popular series that you wrote for a while, the Geek Girl series. Where did that series come from, and what was the initial catalyst that got it off the ground?
I mean, it came from me. I seem to have my most successful books when I base them on myself, which, I mean, I haven't done everything based on myself, but they seem to be the ones that hit. So yeah, it was based on a teenage version of me, and I'd always known I was different. I'd always known that I was like wired in a slightly alternative way. And I struggled at school. I was also spotted by a modeling agency when I was 15 on a school trip. And obviously I had this obsession with writing, but it hadn't occurred to me that anything might have happened in my own life that was worth writing about. But my friend dared me to write the first chapter of a teen book about my modeling experiences, and all this voice came rushing out of me about what it had felt like to be this complete outsider who just didn't fit in. And yeah, I basically went from there, and the series was just it came out of the blue a little bit, I think, for me, because I expected my granddad to buy like a copy, and that would be it. And 10 years later, I was still writing it, and we'd sold 3.5 million copies, and a lot of teenagers
Wow.
who I was across the world. It was very, very weird. But I loved Harriet, who's the main character, and I was very happy kind of writing in that teenage genre for quite a long time. And
Wow.
it feels like it was a massive blessing, to be honest. I feel very lucky.
Well, absolutely. You have to look at it that way. When for someone who has written literally all of her life, when you had the idea to start writing that first Geek Girl book, and you're writing, what we would call in U.S., YA, or um, you know, teen fiction, whatever, however you want to look at it. Um, was that a difficult voice to find at first? You're an adult. You're writing kind of as your younger self. If you say that your character's always informed by you, was that a difficult shift to get into that mindset and uh, to find the voice of that character?
I mean, it was embarrassingly easy. I think that there is a big part of me that's still 16. So it didn't feel like at all a shift. I just basically just clicked a button, and it came out. But even more embarrassingly, I didn't know I was writing for teenagers when I wrote it. I was under the impression that I was writing an adult book about a teenager, which makes no sense to me whatsoever now. But like at the time, I was so naive about the book world that I'd seen things like Dog and the Stick, and Incident in the Nighttime, and that kind of thing. And I knew there were books that were read by adults but were about children or teenagers. And I think I'd assumed, okay, that's what I'm doing. And it wasn't until I finished and my agent started sending it out to publishers, and we sat down with a list of who we were sending it to. And she said, okay, so I've collected, 9 children's editors here. And I said, why have you given them to children's editors? And she went, because you've written a children's book. And I was like, I had no idea. I had no idea I'd written a children's book, which is mind blowing now. But I just didn't think about the fact that because I had a teenage protagonist, it meant it was for teenagers, which actually I think helped the writing, because I wasn't actually trying to appeal to teenagers. I was trying to be an authentic teenager to appeal to adults who had also once been teenagers. So I didn't dumb anything down. I didn't make any kind of, a couple of publishers suggested that I take out some of the Shakespeare references, or the jokes that might be considered too sophisticated or whatever. And I didn't want to. And actually, I think that has meant that it's appealed to a wide range of ages, which has really kind of helped me, I think, in selling them.
It,
So yeah.
is that a difficult distinction? I think when some people think when you're writing YA, that it's a very what's the word I'm looking for? A very determined shift in mindset. You were just writing because you were an adult and you wanted to portray this voice authentically to other adults. Did um, I think some people can't quite wrap their head around how you get into this younger voice, but it seems like that was not a difficult switch for you at all.
No, I think maybe because my experiences at that age were quite traumatic. You know, I was
Mm.
really struggling at school. I was being bullied on a daily basis. It really affected my sense of self and my self-esteem, which, you know, lasted well into adulthood, and is something I'm actually probably still dealing with. And so because it was such a vivid part of my life, like I still carried it with me. It was still something that I was still kind of dealing with. And so when I tapped back into it, it was still there. It was preserved in my brain, basically, exactly as it was. And I still remember exactly how I'd felt in all those situations, you know, how I thought. So for me, it has never felt like I have to, you know, be someone else to write for teenagers. I just almost have to just open the door back into my teenage brain, and it's all there and it's ready to go. Which maybe isn't doesn't make me sound that good as a woman who in her 40s, but it served me well as a writer.
Did is that series finished now, or is it open ended for more stories?
Well, we're currently making the show for Netflix, which should be
Okay.
coming out next year, and I'm really involved in the production of that, and the writing of that. So I'm still very much in her world, ironically, and I've never really closed the door fully. I mean, you know, the very last book of the series, which, you know, was 8 books long, I very specifically left the door open in a very obvious direction, so that if I wanted to come back, I could do so. So that's, I don't think I'll ever completely close it. I mean, I have ideas of Harriet, you know, in a retirement home, you know, in her 90s, still writing these books. So I'll never completely close it. But yeah, it's been really exciting to watch the characters that I made up and this world that I built coming into like a 3-dimensional life, which just, yeah, feels, again, I'm very lucky.
I would imagine, and I've got a number of friends who have written series that have become television adapted or film adapted, and I usually get a mix of responses from them. Some writers are just thrilled that this thing that they created is taking on a new life and a new interpretation, and that's very exciting. And then some writers are just terrified that someone's going to take their creation, these characters that have lived in their head, these settings that they have meticulously created, and they're just going to ruin it, by interpreting it in a way that it was never meant to be.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I think originally I definitely had both of those feelings, and I know it had over the last decade, because the first one came out 10 years ago now. That, like, I had, and there were a few sort of stop-start kind of production processes where we nearly started and then we didn't, but it never quite felt quite right, and I was always a bit nervous about what was going to happen to it, because obviously with any interpretation they can take different angles, they can do it in different styles. And I feel very lucky. Obviously, it's currently being filmed, so I don't know, you know, how it's going to turn out. But partly because it has been based on me as a teenager, as well as the fact that I wrote them, I've been really involved in it from the ground up. You know, I've been, you know, asked questions about casting. I've been involved in the writing of episodes. I get to oversee the whole project, and so that makes me feel a lot more relaxed. And I also really trust the team that are working on it. They seem to know exactly what they're doing, and the casting is phenomenal.
Nice.
So far, so good. It seems to be a very, one of those really rare, glorious experiences of just seeing everything that you've imagined just become real. Yeah,
Well, it's got to
it's
be a good feeling when you meet a creative partner who almost feels like a creative soulmate, that they have the same vision and they um, you know take care with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really does feel like it's coming to people, everyone involved in the show, right from every single angle. It genuinely has their heart invested in it. It's not a, you know, kind of a sort of flash in the pan or a money maker. It's someone everyone really cares about it, and the story and the characters. So it feels like it's coming from a good place, which, you know, with the books, it felt similar. It felt like everyone who was publishing them felt like they cared, they genuinely cared. And I think that genuinely has good vibes behind it, you know, in what everyone coming at it from the same direction.
That's fantastic. So you, if I understand right, you wrote that the last Geek Girl book that you published, and you took a break and gave yourself a little bit of a chance to shift gears and to go in a new direction. And on the other side of that new direction was Cassandra in Reverse. Tell me what, you know, one thing that I'm fascinated with, and I know people get tired of me asking this question, but um, I love to hear about the moment of creation. You know, in one moment, nothing about Cassandra existed. It was just not there. And then either a character walks onto the stage of your mind and you're like, well, who is she and what is she up to? And, you know, that sort of thing. Or, you know, maybe you read something or overhear a conversation and the what if game starts, you know, playing in your mind. And then in some form or fashion, this story does exist. And then it's your job as the writer to dig it out, polish it up, you know, excavate it, and then it turns into a book that we all can hold in our hands. What was that first moment of creation that brought about this story?
It was actually very clear. I had, it was actually during writing Geek Girl, I was on tour. I was on a bus tour around England, talking to school children at schools about Geek Girl. And I had just had a breakup. So I'd just been dumped about 2 days before the tour started. And I was in a bit of a mess. So I was in the back of this tour bus with my name emblazoned in a minibus across the back, which was in itself hilarious. And I was going through a breakup. So I was crying in the back. I was eating crisps, I was spilling chocolate all over myself. And all I could do, because it had come out of the blue, all I could do, it was a short relationship, but it was quite intense. And all I could do in my brain on those long road trips between schools, all I could do was think about, you know, go through the relationship in detail, because I have a very, very detailed long-term memory. And all I could do was go back and try and work out where it had gone wrong, like exactly what had been said or done, you know, what facial expression had I pulled, what argument had just broken things, what exactly could I go back to in that relationship to tweak or fix, and then how would it play out had I changed that. So for about a solid week for that entire tour, I was basically going through and giving it alternative endings. Every time, you know, I would undo one narrative, and then I would see how that played out in my head, and it became obsessive. I was looping and looping and looping, and it did slow down eventually, but you know, I was still looping for probably months into some level. And when I sort of came out of that funk, I thought, actually, that's quite an idea for a book. You know, a woman who discovers that she has the power to edit her own life, essentially, that she can go back and use time to investigate and explore and try and you know, fix things, basically, and save a relationship that's gone wrong. And I was still working on Geek Girl, so I didn't actually have the time to then write. And it didn't feel like a children's book, for sure. It didn't feel like something that a teenager would do. But the other question, which, you know, when I posited it to my agent, her understandable question was, why would someone do that? Why would someone hyper focus and fixate like that on a relationship to such level, instead of moving on and just getting on with life and finding someone else? And you know, it was an excellent question, but I couldn't answer it because I was like, well, I haven't, and that's what I am doing in my brain. But I put the idea in my pocket and thought, I'm going to mull on that. And then when I was diagnosed as autistic, 4 years later, suddenly that snapped into focus, and I went, okay, that's why she's doing it. That's because she's wired like me, because she's hyper focusing and she's looping and she's repeating.
It's her superpower.
Yeah. It's her superpower, yeah. So that suddenly, but that origin, I remember literally lying in the back of a bus covered in crisps and like, you know, bobbing into a blanket, with the driver trying not to look at me because it was embarrassing. So that was the exact moment of creation, which is not as glamorous or as artistic as you might hope.
Well, but it seems like that was a very visceral experience, and one of those that, because there's, as a writer, you'll have lots of moments of inspiration, and you think, oh, this is the best thing ever, and then 3 days later you're like, well, it's not that great, actually. It felt right in the moment, but now that I've kind of let it cool off a little bit, that's not it. But then there are those kind of visceral experiences that 3-4 months down the road, it's still just pulling on you, and just demanding to be chased down. And it sounds like it was one of those.
Yeah, I mean, it was 5 years between having the idea and actually starting to
Wow.
write it. So it had been, I call it casseroling, which is ironic because obviously her name is Cassie, but it was called casseroling back when I was writing Geek Girl as well. I basically, when I have an idea and I think, okay, there's something in that, but it's not ready. It's not ready to, it's not at the moment, with Cassie, it was like, okay, a woman can use time to, fix a relationship. Doesn't feel that feminist, doesn't feel that fleshed out, feels a bit flat. Okay, right, pop it in my back pocket and let it stew for a bit and let all the juices kind of mix up. And when I come back to it, sometimes my brain has been processing it, but without me realizing it. And suddenly I'll go, oh, okay, now I understand it from a different perspective. So yeah, I do that with all of my ideas. And it's actually been probably one of my biggest writing tools, is that I don't force ideas. I just kind of put them away and let my subconscious work on them while I'm not paying attention. Which is extremely irritating for people who want outlines now. Because I'm like, I don't know what they're, and I'm just going to let them do them on their own. So
I said early on in our conversation that when I first got the book, that you kind of come into every book with preconceived notions, what you think the book's going to be about, and you read the term time travel. I mean, it's right there on the cover of the book. It's no secret that this is a plot device, and you immediately start thinking about all the different time travel stories that you've read, and you think, well, this is a time travel book, and it is kinda, but it's not about time travel. It has time travel. Yes, that's a major plot device that you use, but that's not the point of the book. Were there ever times where you're using this very specific plot device, but you're really trying to say something else? Was that a difficult thing to work through? How do I use this thing without it becoming the thing? Does that make sense at all?
yeah, absolutely. And I was very, very aware of that while I was planning it. I was like, for me, when I realized that I was autistic and I started to understand my neurology better, it suddenly became very clear that time travel, like you say, is not it's not sci-fi. It's not a kind of really about time travel. It is almost a way of showing how the autistic brain works, right? Because we tend to repeat things and we tend to loop things and we tend to wish we hadn't done stuff that was socially inappropriate or we didn't understand. We there are so many situations where we don't completely grasp what's going on at the time, and so there's a lot of regret, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of guilt. So in the biggest way, I use time travel to show what that neurodivergent brain can be like, in the looping and the undoing. Essentially, I spent a lot of my life wishing I could undo stuff that I have said or done, because
Don't we all?
don't we all? Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're right. It is time travel, but it isn't, because it's a narrative device to basically show rather than tell how the brain can work, which I found a lot more. There's a line where Cassie says I'm something along the lines of I thought I was trying to undo the mistakes that I'd made, but I'm actually trying to undo myself. And it is that sense of self-loathing and self-questioning and all the feelings that come around that, which is what she's really using it for, is to find connection, to find love. And yeah, that's what I wanted. I wanted as well, with I love time travel books, but I wanted to do something more intimate and more domestic. I wanted to see, what it's all very well and good being able to go back, 1,000 years, but what would it be like if you only went back 3 minutes and just undid something that you'd said? It made it more human, it made it more real, and it made it feel like something we would all do. Because if I got given time travel as a gift, I don't think that I would be going back 25 years. It would just be too much of a gamble. I wouldn't know
Right.
what I'd be screwing with. So, but I could definitely see myself unburning toast, or uh,
Right.
unbreaking a mug that I've dropped, or something like that. So I just wanted to bring it that humor and that warmth and that intimacy that comes from that very human ability to just regret and wish that you could undo stuff.
Well, um, I think the ability to time travel and to fix things that we have broken, I think everyone wishes at some point. I just wish I could go back and unsay this thing, or so many things would be better. Um,
Yeah.
and there've been lots of great stories that have been told and that have used this plot device, but I find it interesting that of all of the time travel books, movies, that we've seen, rarely does time travel solve anything. Like everyone thinks, "Oh, this is gonna be amazing if I can do this," and then when they actually have that ability, doesn't always fix things. Were you when you came up with the idea, I'm going to do this, did you think about the consequences of that, and how um rooted in reality that real human relationships are, that some things just can't be undone, um while also having fun playing with it? Did you ever weigh the consequences of having a power like this?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time thinking about it, and thinking about it and as you say, like very real terms. And it was important for me to kind of explore the negatives and the positives. The
Yeah.
negatives, the things that you will break. And I'm obviously not going to do any spoilers because that would be a very bad author. But I think that we all know that time is fragile, and that if you pick one thread, others are going to unravel. And so I had a lot of fun with that, both from a narrative perspective and from a comic perspective, because while you're paying attention over here, something else is going on over there that you have not paid attention to. So that was really important, but also the positives. And I think that for me, and like a lot of people, like you say, everyone wishes they could undo. Everyone wishes that everyone has things they regret and wish that they could just slightly erase, maybe. And I just feel like that the way that Cassie uses time to connect with people around her. And I know that I've always wished that sometimes I just had more time, because I'm not necessarily that good straight off. I need that time to process. I need that time to work things out. I need that time to understand what's going on around me. And so, I did want it to make it positive too. And that sometimes we just need a little more. Sometimes we need a dress rehearsal first. Um, so yeah, that was it. I definitely thought it was a very contemplative book, but it also felt very organic. I know when I sat down, when I had a plan, I always plan my books all the way through before I start writing. And obviously I planned this one too. But it also felt very, very natural. It felt like Cassie, when I was writing, it didn't feel like I was being too strategic. It felt like it was very much organic behavior. This is what I would do. This is how I would feel. And I kept track of all the different threads very easily, which
Right.
like, did you have loads of post-its all over the walls? And I was like, this is what my brain does anyway. So
Right.
actually, for the first
Yeah, I
time,
would be doing this anyway.
yeah, this is how my brain functions. It keeps hold of multiple threads, and it undoes them, and it redoes them, and it undoes them. So I'm just basically doing what my brain is built to do,
Yeah.
which was quite refreshing.
Holly, you mentioned earlier your diagnosis with autism, and you came to that realization later in life than a lot of people do.
Mm.
When you started writing this book and this character, and you decided that Cassie was going to have a lot of these tendencies, these superpowers, if we will, was there ever any trepidation in writing a character like this, and maybe wondering how people would receive her, or um
Yeah.
what's it?
So much fear, to be honest, and so much vulnerability, so much exposure.
Yeah.
I knew I was going to make her autistic. I'd had my diagnosis, and I knew that the only way for me to represent that in a book would be to be exactly myself, right? Because I don't know what it's like to experience life through another
Yeah.
autistic person's brain.
To just
So I
be
had to
authentic.
be authentic. So I had to be authentically me. And that meant exposing everything about myself I hate, and
Mm.
everything I'm ashamed of, and everything I've tried to mask or hide my entire life, which was an incredible degree of risk, and it took quite a lot of courage, essentially, and an absolute fear that the responses would be what the responses to me in real life have often been, which like Cassie, I've often had a lot of negative adjectives thrown at me throughout the years. And it's been almost overwhelmingly positive and brilliant, and everyone has been like, we love Cassie, this is brilliant. Every now and then I'll get a review that's like, she's weird, she's odd, why is she weird, like, she's annoying me, she's really, and I'm like, and that does hurt, because I'm like, it's difficult to take not a personal angle when it is yourself on the page, but it also means I kind of nailed it, because that's how people respond to me in real life as well. But yeah, so I've never written anything that makes me as vulnerable, because even Geek Girl was me a long time before I wrote the books. So there was that distance, there was that gap. I was no longer that
Yeah.
15, 16-year-old, whereas this was much, much closer, which was scary.
Well, in a time where we are looking for characters that cut through all of the crowd of fiction characters that we encounter, there are more books being published now. You, it's a breath of fresh air to see a character who is uniquely herself, and with all of her quirks, and the things that make her special, the things that make her stand out are the things that as a writer who has had to deal with a lot of these issues herself, I'm sure has you putting your guard up, to not stand out too much. But these are the things that make this character so endearing. And what a tremendous job you did in creating this character and representing yourself, and showing the rest of the world that that she's such a lovable character. I absolutely love the character of Cassie. She's amazing.
Thank you. And I think from a writer's perspective, all of us, or anyone who writes, there is that level of struggling with our own egos, right, when we're writing, because whether or not we're writing ourselves or not, we kind of want to be liked on the page. We want our characters to be liked. We want it's almost like a popularity competition. And I think that there is a little bit of a trend sometimes towards reviews of books kind of leaning towards, do I like this person or not? Is she or he uncomplicatedly likable? And it just doesn't feel human to me. I'm like, well, none of us are uncomplicatedly likable. So there were times where, for instance, my editor or a reader would say, in the process, would be like, oh, should she do this or say this? It does feel like it might alienate people. And I'm like, that's exactly why she has to do it, because we need to be brave enough to have people be human and unlikable and real and three-dimensional,
Yeah.
without having readers feel like they've been pushed away because they can't like every single part of every single person, because all humans have parts of us inside us that we want to hide, that we're ashamed of, that we wish didn't exist, and that we would never tell people about, and I just think as writers sometimes we have to push against that natural ego that says, I want to be liked and I want my characters to be liked, and for me it's more important that they just feel real.
Yeah. You said that you plan out your books before you get into the writing. What is your pre-writing stage like, and how detailed is your outline or your plan before you start the drafting?
It's detailed. I by the time I got to the point where I'm about to start the book, every chapter is outlined, so I know exactly what's going on in every single chapter. I leave plenty of room for me to be able to play and explore, and sometimes the characters take me in different directions, but I essentially build it up piece by piece, and I spend the majority of my time planning, and that's partly because of the fact that it helps me, with my writing because of the way my brain works. I'm also dyspraxic, which everyone thinks means just being clumsy, but it affects your ability to structure in your head, which can affect your writing. And it almost made me fail my exams at school until I worked out how to get around it. And I got around it by planning in extreme detail. So that's what I still do. And it means that before I start a book, I know exactly what's happening in every chapter, because otherwise I'll get lost and I'll get confused. So I build up little brick by little brick until it's a good 5,000 word outline, in proper like boxes with numbers, with which my editor loves. She's like, oh, it's just very rare to get this kind of outline before you get a book. Most I think all writers will sort of say, oh yeah, it'll be kind of like this, where I'm like, it will be exactly like this. Yeah.
I'll bet when you start drafting the novel, it that makes things super easy, because every time when you sit down each day, you know exactly what the work needs to be for that day.
Yeah, and I think also because I know what's happening, I mean, in a relative amount of detail, there's obviously going to be stuff that surprises me, but because I know what's happening, I can focus on character, I can focus on humor, I can focus on the fun stuff, which I don't have to sort of, I know that because of the way that I used to work at school, for instance, when I had an essay and an exam, the first time I did exams, I just scribbled. None of it made sense. None of it was like cohesive or structured. And I failed all my exams. And then I structured it and discovered that I could actually do it when it was structured. So giving me that base, that core, allows my particular brain to play and have fun and use language to its maximum potential without panicking about, where is this chapter going? What is it bringing to the table on the story? So it just helps me with pacing, and it helps me with structure and narrative. And yeah, I couldn't do it any other way, to be honest.
The book is Cassandra in Reverse. If you're here in the United States, in the UK, it's called
The Cassandra Complex.
The Cassandra Complex. It's available everywhere now. You can go grab it, support your local bookstore, go grab it in physical form, or we'll have links in the show notes if you want to grab the Kindle edition, or the print edition, or the audiobook from Amazon. We'll put links to all of those as well. Holly, if people are just learning about you and want to dig into all the great stuff that you're up to, is there a place online where they can find you and dig into all that you're doing?
I have a website, but I made it myself. It's not great. hollysmale.com. But mostly Instagram, Twitter, probably is the best place to find me. And I tend to lurk there more than I should, given that I've got another book to write. But yeah, that's probably the best place to come say hi. And I tend to say hi back.
Excellent. We'll link all that up to make it easy for folks to find you. Holly, this has been so much fun chatting. We're going to send everyone to pick up their copy of Cassandra in Reverse. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
It was so much fun. Thank you.